The forest closed around us like a wall, each step dragging us deeper into a silence so heavy it pressed against our chests. We had been hiking since morning, 5 of us together, all laughter and teasing at first, but by late afternoon the light had begun to vanish in the thick canopy above, and our voices grew quieter. Daniel led the way with his usual bravado, machete slashing at undergrowth, while Mark followed close behind, compass in hand, muttering about staying on course. Sophie carried most of the food, quiet and serious, her eyes always darting to the trees. Jonah, ever the clown, kept making jokes about bears and ghosts, but even his voice sounded forced. I brought up the rear, tired, my backpack heavier than it should have been, and though I didn't say anything, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to be there. It was near dusk when we found it. The cabin. It shouldn't have been there. No map showed it. No trail led to it. Yet there it stood, a skeletal ruin of blackened logs and a roof that sagged as though it had been pushed from above. The clearing around it was unnaturally bare, as if the forest itself didn't dare grow too close. We hesitated at first, but Mark said it was shelter, better than tents of night, and so we went inside. The smell hit us first, mildew, wet wood, and something faintly metallic like old blood. The floor was warped, furniture splintered and collapsed, but there were signs it had been lived in once. A rusted kettle, broken dishes, and in the corner on a rotting table, an object that drew me in like a magnet, a leather-bound journal, its cover stained dark red. I picked it up despite the others warning me not to. The leather was oddly warm, as if it had been sitting in sunlight, though the cabin was freezing cold. Jonah snorted and called it my cursed diary, but his voice faltered when I flipped the first page and saw the writing. It was cramped, jagged, as though scratched into the paper more than written. The words were in English, but they didn't make sense. Broken sentences about shadows moving, voices whispering, things in the trees. I closed it quickly, not wanting to read more. We decided to make camp inside anyway. We built a fire in the hearth, its smoke rising reluctantly up the chimney, and sat around trying to ignore the creaks of the old walls. But the night stretched on too long. We all heard it, faint footsteps outside in the leaves. At first we thought it might be a deer, but the steps circled the cabin, slow and deliberate. Daniel gripped his makeshift spear. Sophie whispered that maybe it was just a wind, but wind doesn't walk. We didn't sleep much. Morning came gray and heavy, the forest shrouded in mist. Jonah was gone. His bedroll lay flattened by the fire, his backpack half open, but no sign of him. We called, searched the clearing. Even followed a trail of footprints into trees, but they vanished within 50 feet, as though the earth swallowed them whole. Mark said maybe Jonah had wandered off to relieve himself and gotten lost, but none of us believed that. Sophie wanted to leave, to turn back before we went deeper, but Daniel insisted Jonah was fine, and we'd find him if we kept moving. Against her protests, we packed up and left the cabin. But I couldn't stop thinking about the red journal. I had slipped it into my bag. Something about it gnawed at me, like unfinished business. The day dragged on. The forest grew darker, not from clouds or from the trees themselves. Crowding closer, their trunks gnarled and twisted like bones. We walked for hours, but the compass spun wildly, and Mark cursed under his breath, claiming we were still heading north. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, a sour, coppery tang in the air, but soon it was unmistakable, blood. We found the source in a shallow ravine. There was Jonah's jacket, torn and soaked in blackened stains, draped over a jagged rock. His backpack lay nearby, ripped open, its contents scattered like entrails, but no body. Sophie screamed and Mark pulled her back, insisted we keep moving, but Daniel climbed down to check. He found something else there, prints of mud, too large for any animal we knew, with elongated shapes like fingers instead of claws. None of us spoke of it, but we all saw. That night we camped in silence, too afraid to return to cabin, too far to leave the forest. I couldn't sleep, though the others eventually drifted into uneasy rest. The fire burned low, and I found myself staring at the journal. I don't remember opening it, but suddenly it was in my hands, pages fluttering as though caught in a wind only I could feel. My eyes landed on a passage that made my skin crawl. It follows when the fire dies, It feeds when we close our eyes. It takes one by one until none remain. My hand shook as I shoved it back into the pack, but even then I felt it humming faintly as though alive. Somewhere in the dark, branches snapped. I thought I saw a shadow move beyond the firelight, tall and crooked, but when I blinked it was gone. Daniel stirred beside me, muttered something in his sleep, and I wanted to wake him to tell him I was scared, but the words caught in my throat. Something is wrong in these woods, and it is watching us. The wind howled to the skeletal trees as we trudged deeper into the wilderness. 5 of us in all, our packs heavy and our nerves not yet frayed. Daniel led the way, swinging his flashlight in long arcs that cut through the misty dusk, while Mark followed with his compass clenched in his fist as if it were a holy relic. Sophie carried the food pack and muttered about how the trail markers had long since vanished, her voice sharp but low, as though afraid the forest itself might hear. Jonah trailed behind, humming tunelessly, occasionally cracking jokes that no one laughed at. I kept to the middle, silently observing, trying not to admit that I already felt the forest breathing against my skin. We had planned this trip for months, desperate to escape the monotony of lectures and deadlines. The northern mountains were our chosen destination, a place locals called Raven's Hollow. Nobody went there anymore. The villagers said it was cursed. We laughed then, convinced that superstition could not hurt us. By the second day, the trees had grown impossibly tall, blotting out the sun so that we walked in endless twilight. Moss covered every surface, and the air tasted damp metallic. Around noon, we stumbled on the cabin. It leaned awkwardly against a slope, its roof collapsed, its walls warped by time. Mark insisted we press forward to find higher ground for camp, but curiosity tugged at me. Against his protests, I pushed open the swollen door and stepped inside. The smell hit first, a sour mixture of mold, rot, and something faintly coppery. Broken shelves lined the walls, and in the center, half buried under debris, lay a book. It was bound in thick leather, dark red as though it had been dyed with blood. Without thinking, I picked it up. The cover was warm to the touch. Jonah peeked over my shoulder and made a face. "Looks like something out of a horror movie," he joked, though his laughter was tight. The pages inside were scrawled with writing, the ink smeared and uneven. I only read one line before Sophie pulled me out of the cabin. It said, in uneven script, "It watches when you sleep." That night, we camped by a stream. The forest seemed to press closer, and the firelight barely pushed back the shadows. Jonah kept glancing over his shoulder, and Daniel whittled a stick to a point, his jaw clenched. Mark snapped at us to relax, but even he kept staring into the dark as if expecting something to emerge. Around midnight, a noise woke me. It was faint at first, like a whisper of wind, but it grew into a low groan, dragging through the trees, circling the camp. Daniel shouted, flashlight in hand, but the beam revealed nothing but endless trunks. Sophie clutched her blanket, whispering prayers under her breath. Mark swore it was just an animal. Still, nobody slept. On the third day, the forest shifted. The stream we had followed vanished into a marsh that wasn't on the map. The trees leaned in strange angles, and the air seemed thicker, harder to breathe. Jonah stopped humming. He barely spoke at all. When he did, it was only to mutter that something was following us. We laughed nervously, told him to stop scaring Sophie, but I saw the way his eyes darted between the trees. That night, Jonah was gone. His sleeping bag lay empty beside the fire, his boots still neatly placed, his pack untouched. There was no sign of a struggle, no tracks leading away. Mark searched until dawn, shouting his name into the forest. No answer came. By morning, his jokes were already a memory. We pressed on, though each step felt heavier, each glance over the shoulder sharper. The silence grew unbearable. Even the birds had stopped. Sophie walked with her head down, whispering to herself, while Daniel grew restless, his grip on the spear whitening. I kept the red journal in my pack, though I didn't dare open it again. I swore I could feel it pulsing faintly, as if it were alive. That evening, the whispers returned. At first it was wind, but soon the sounds formed words, faint and distant, echoing our names. Mark shouted into the dark, his voice cracking with anger and fear, but the forest answered only with silence. Then, A scream ripped through the night. It was Daniel's voice. We found him near the edge of camp, his face pale, his spear broken in half. His arm was slashed open as though by claws. He swore something had grabbed him, something tall and shadowed. Mark insisted he had stumbled into a branch, but Daniel's eyes told another story. He trembled violently, refusing to speak further. We bound his wound as best we could, though Sophie whispered that it was already turning black around the edges. We huddled close that night, but I could not sleep. The forest groaned and shifted, and I thought I saw shapes moving just beyond the firelight, tall, thin, human but not. My hand kept drifting to the red journal, to the uneven writing that seemed to call to me from the darkness. By dawn, Daniel was gone. If you made it this far through the red journal, you're braver than most. But tell me, would you have kept reading or burned the book the moment you found it? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more chilling stories that will keep you up at night, make sure to subscribe and join me for the next nightmare.